Hello, everyone. I am from the TAB staff. My name is Scott. We're just waiting to get things underway. We are currently live streamed. And so let me see here. I see Dakota, I see Joseph, I see Lily.
Everyone, I am from the TAB staff. My name is
sorry.
Scott. Just things underway. We are currently live streamed. And so
All right. So let's see. It looks like we're still missing 2 judges. Is that right? We're looking for a panel of 5. Oh, there's another one. Catherine. All right, good. So I think that just leaves one more judge to go. And I know we have a lot of double enters here. So, oh, and that might be is this Terry? Hello, Terry. Okay, so I think we got 5 judges: Terry, Lily, Catherine, Dakota, and Joseph. Okay, all right, good. So I will now turn it over to Lily. Can you kind of run the show here? And I'm going to bow out and let you be in control.
Okay, sounds good. So welcome everyone to the final round of varsity oratory. Congratulations to everyone on being here. I know we have a lot of contestants double and triple entered today, so we might need to go a little out of order. So just keep an eye on that. Otherwise, I believe we should be okay to start, judges. Yeah? Okay, awesome. With our first speaker, AC2 Pooja Kasam.
Can you guys hear me all right? Is everything okay? Thank you. And for whoever's doing time signals, could I just get a 1 at 9 and a fist at 10 if I get there? Thank you so much. Everybody has that one embarrassing moment that sticks with them. That one moment that pops in your head at the oddest times and makes you cringe. Mine happened several years ago at a family vacation to Yellowstone. Now, my aunt considers herself an economical person. Her words, not mine. So every day at 6 a.m., she would send me down to the hotel lobby to forage through the continental breakfast. Now, I thought nothing of it until one day I was stopped by hotel security. The guard comes over and asks, "Are you homeless?" Now, me being completely embarrassed that my bread hoarding looked like I was starting up a Subway franchise instead of stealing food, replied with an, "Oh no, my aunt's just very economical," and sent me down to get some food. The guard simply says, "I don't think so. I think your aunt's just cheap." Now, while digesting, not the food, by the way, but of what just happened, it hit me. My aunt is absolutely cheap, and no amount of euphemistic reframing like economical, bargain hunting, or budget friendly will change that. We humans have a habit to suddenly hint at words that can be considered too harsh or upfront. In other words, according to Trudy Grovier, philosopher and author of The Practical Study of Agreement, we use a euphemism, which is an inoffensive word or expression used in place of an offensive or unpleasant one. And there lies our problem. We've become over-dependent on using euphemisms to convey our message, and we need to stop creating these false realities. So first, let's ask for that discount when examining why we actually use euphemisms. Then thrift our way through the effects. And finally, let's drop some actual cash to analyze our solutions. There's a famous quote by American linguist and author William Lutz. Language is designed to evade responsibility, make the unpleasant appear pleasant, and the unattractive appear attractive. Now, during a conversation, we try to avoid mentioning anything that might disrupt the harmony of it. So to steer clear from an uncomfortable conversation, we use euphemisms to soften the negative impact of our original choice of words. For example, instead of calling someone a liar, we'd say they're misleading, telling half-truths, or relying on alternative facts. Now, even though the main use of a euphemism is to replace an offensive word with an innocuous one, there are different motivations in doing so: to shield or to disguise. First, we use euphemisms to avoid or shield the direct meaning of unpleasant topics. In this regard, according to Dr. Crespo Fernandez, English professor at the University of Castilla-La Mancha, a euphemism functions as a powerful linguistic tool used to smooth communication and preserve interpersonal relationships and verbal politeness. So poor turns into economically disadvantaged. Torture turns into enhanced interrogation. And according to Kate Burridge, linguistics chair at Monash University, death turns into a diagnostic misadventure at the highest magnitude. But again, we simply want to be polite, and these subtle versions make it seem that way. Now, sometimes we euphemize to disguise. Euphemisms can be a form of deception, and as stated by Dr. Salvatore Lacone, author of the book Right to the Point, right with a W, by the way. He's very clever. Euphemisms can hide seemingly simple and straightforward words behind over-complex and deceptive ones. To simply put it, we use euphemisms to confuse, manipulate, and disorient. But by manipulating our word choice, it influences us to alter our perceptions of reality. Last March, Breonna Taylor was shot and killed by Kentucky police officers. But according to a local news outlet, Wave 3, the incident was described as an officer-involved shooting. But according to Lingua Obscura, an Australian linguist, in the phrase officer-involved shooting, the language itself suppresses law enforcement's own actions. Framing reports about crimes euphemistically or removing displeasing information out of fear of offending can certainly affect the way people understand the moral implications of any situation. And ultimately, repeated use of this troublesome language will determine if perpetrators are held responsible for their crimes. But these deceitful euphemisms aren't only used in the media, but in our personal lives as well. In August of '99, my ma and father were going to a general checkup with a nurse practitioner. Now, after both of their checkups, the nurse calls my ma aside and tells her, "Your husband's screws are a little loose." Not knowing the true extent of such euphemistic language, my ma just assumed that my father was stressed out about work. Nothing to worry about. But when she woke up the next morning, my father wasn't there. Not in the house, not at work, not outside. Eventually, she found him at the international airport. Why? My father believed that there was a government chip in the back of his neck that was trying to track and control his life. Now, my ma, overwhelmed, immediately takes him to a specialized psychiatrist. And within just a 10-minute discussion, my father is diagnosed with schizophrenia. With the nurse's use of such euphemistic language, she didn't convey the true severity of my father's condition. Now, my father is healthy and happy. Things are under control. But still, to this day, I don't understand why that nurse practitioner wasn't just precise in her diagnosis. And because of this incident, I've tried to become straightforward. Because as once said by comedian and social critic George Carlin, I don't like words that conceal reality. Now, I'm not saying we should completely avoid using euphemisms, because frankly, that's just not going to happen. But when using a euphemism, we need to ask ourselves two main questions. How is my euphemism going to impact the person I'm conversing with? And why am I using a euphemism in this situation? It's simple. If a euphemism has the potential to indirectly harm or inflict pain, don't use it. And if the motivation to use a euphemism is to manipulate or to deceive, it is simply better to be transparent and honest. Now, we should also be asking these questions on a societal scale as well. Mass media is a one-way system of communication from the powerful to the disadvantaged. And with the need to get everyone living with the same set of facts, newsmakers need to be keen on their transparency. According to Sarah Jackson, associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania, the way the news covers activism can profoundly influence public support or rejection on policies that might solve social ills such as racism and police brutality. The news simply needs to call racists, well, racists. Say shot by the police, not the officer involved shooting. Newsmakers need to understand that these slight editorial choices have immense weight when shown to the public. Now, I've definitely learned my lesson at the hotel that day. Now, I've made it a point to call my aunt cheap when she's acting like it. It helps me hold myself and others accountable in confronting the truth. In doing so, we won't be creating false realities with euphemisms. In doing so, we'll know the true importance of each and every word. And in doing so, we'll be good, honest people.
Okay, thank you, Pooja. Judges, the time on that was 9:46. And I just want to check before we move on to our next speaker. Do we have anyone in here that has another event to get to? Okay, then we will just continue down the list with our second speaker, P2, Jihan Abdi.
And may I get a 1 at 9 and fist at 10 if I get there? Thank you. My life is a Greek tragedy. Why, you may ask? I have 5 siblings. Not only do I have a sister who draws all over my walls and another who steals my clothes, but a younger brother who makes a game out of stealing my phone and sending out embarrassing texts to my friends. I'm like the Greek mythological figure Prometheus. According to Greek mythology, the god Zeus chained Prometheus to the top of the mountain, where each day an eagle would tear his body apart. Don't worry, it gets worse. Prometheus would die this horrible death each day, only to be rejuvenated each night and have to face the same fate again a few hours later. Okay, so maybe I'm not exactly like Prometheus, but I do believe we live under Prometheus' shadow. We live in a time of trauma, and just like Prometheus, we are visited by that trauma nearly every day. Bessel van der Kolk writes in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, that people who have trauma aren't only the soldiers and the refugees. Trauma happens to us, our friends, our families, our neighbors. In fact, according to a 2013 study by the National Council of Behavioral Health, 70% of adult Americans have experienced some type of traumatic event in their lifetime. The truth is, we don't deal with our trauma. And until we do, we will suffer the consequences. So today, let's look at how we don't deal with our trauma by first looking at collective trauma. Second, hidden trauma. Then looking at the harms. And finally, some solutions. On the morning of November 11th, 2020, a young teen girl groggily walked up her stairs and headed towards the bathroom, only to find the bristles of her toothbrush all up in her sister's crusty mouth. I'm that young teen girl. That was trauma. Actually, the American Psychological Association defines trauma as the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. Now, trauma is usually thought of as something individual, but we fail to realize we also experience trauma collectively. Just ask a Minnesota Vikings fan. It can be a single catastrophic event like a flood or hurricane, or it can be a sustained period of distress caused by a financial crisis, a pandemic, or ongoing and unchecked demonstrations of prejudice and hatred. As Professor Hebel, author of the 2020 book Collective Trauma, states, the impact of collective trauma is not much different than individualized trauma, but our tendency to overlook it is. Hebel goes on to explain that many of us carry this collective strain without knowing it, which means the pandemic sits with us right now in this room. The financial crisis sits with us right now in this room. Racial injustice sits with us right now in this room. And we operate under this collective denial, where we either ignore that trauma on our bodies or we simply mistake it for something else. Because we often think of trauma in a very limited way, which means the severity and pervasiveness of trauma is far greater than we have ever imagined. We've normalized so many stories and pictures of trauma into our culture, starting with Prometheus, Hercules, and many other Greek tales, all the way up to Criminal Minds. Seriously, people, that's like 15 seasons of trauma. And this is my second area of analysis, how hidden trauma is something that our bodies can physically carry. You don't usually define trauma as a physical condition, but our bodies often display signs of hidden trauma. Body pains, headaches, stomach problems, chronic fatigue. Unfortunately, we go looking for other explanations of those symptoms, and our trauma goes unacknowledged and unaddressed. Tamara Hill, a licensed therapist and certified trauma professional, explains that trauma can be intergenerational. When someone experiences trauma and they do not cope with it, they often find other strategies to avoid, ignore, or medicate their pain. Over time, these strategies become normalized, passed down to the next generation, and even accepted as just a part of the culture. It's hidden trauma. We even have evidence that trauma alters our DNA. Rachel Yehuda, a professor of neurochemistry at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, founded the field of epigenetics, which looks at how environmental trauma can be passed down from one generation to the next through these genetic mutations. Here's the problem. For many of us today, we are still dealing with the trauma visited upon our parents, grandparents, and ancestors. Yet, we don't even know it, because it is nearly impossible to address something that you don't even know is there. And perhaps the greatest impact of our unaddressed trauma is our racialized trauma. For the longest time, we have tried to confront racism and white supremacy with appeals to logic, reason, and human compassion. But it's time to change the conversation. Reisman Menakem, in his book, My Grandmother's Hands, argues that white bodies carry this white supremacy as trauma, as something that has accumulated over time, quietly building up, until even the sight of a Black body triggers involuntary responses of fear, anger, and even violence. It's a history of trauma that predates even the concept of race itself, where white bodies in Europe, according to historian Barbara Tuchman, were regularly traumatized by the all too common practices of brutality, torture, and public executions, turning many of these displays into public entertainment. These bodies carried their trauma to this country, where it became racialized to maintain a social and economic order. It became normalized in the spectacle of human auctions, public beatings, and the violent lynchings of Black bodies. These were seeds of trauma planted in white bodies that grew until it just didn't seem out of the ordinary. For 4,000 people right here in Minnesota to watch the spectacle of executing 38 Dakota lives in 1862. Or the mob of thousands who showed up in Duluth to brutally murder 3 innocent Black men in 1920. Now, I'm not trying to absolve white bodies from taking responsibility for these horrific acts, but this can add some nuance to why white bodies respond as they do when they come into contact with non-white bodies. Because whatever approach we are taking now, it is not enough. We are all broken, white and Black bodies. But until white bodies can confront and grow out of their trauma, until Black bodies are given the chance to heal and mend, our nation's trauma will continue to be our tragedy. In the end, Prometheus was liberated from his agony after he gave up an important secret to Zeus. And that's a good map for the rest of us, because we too must give up our secrets, our secret traumas. And the best way we can do that is to address our trauma in our digital, physical, and collective lives. For starters, we need to be mindful of the trauma that we pass on and trigger in our digital spaces. Whitney Garrett Walker explains in an October 2020 HuffPost article that we often think we are helping when we post and share videos of Black individuals getting brutally hurt or killed. But this can be a terrorizing experience for those who live with the constant reminders that their bodies are not safe within our communities. Second, we need to listen to our physical bodies. Many times we ignore the symptoms of distress or attribute them to other causes. Working with trained counselors, therapists, and support groups, along with meditative, breathing, and physical activity, can give our bodies the chance to heal. And third, we need to confront our collective trauma. A 2019 issue of the US News and World Report explains that collective trauma can be alleviated through collective efforts, such as recognition, remembrance, and communal therapy. Because when we acknowledge the trauma of our past and commit to healing as individuals, we don't just heal ourselves or our community, we heal the world. Today, we use the phrase Promethean task to mean something that is impossible or unbearable. Processing and healing from our trauma might feel like that at times, but this doesn't mean that we are inferior or defective. We have been hurt and we can heal because, like Prometheus, our trauma does not need to become our destiny.
All right, thank you, Jihan. Judges, the time was 9:59. And then we will move on to our next speaker. Let me just check who is here. We do not have P5 DeMarco Walton, is that correct? I don't see him. Okay, so we're going to move on to P3 Lydia Voss.
Hello. Can everyone hear and see me okay? All right, and then could I possibly get time signals? Can I get a 1 at 9 and a fist at 10, please? All right, thank you. The creator was born right here in Minnesota. A shy kid who had little confidence. His initial work was even rejected by his high school newspaper. However, his love for drawing persisted. And in 1950, the comic strip Peanuts was released, and Charles Schulz became a household name. But his creation, Charlie Brown, wasn't your regular comic strip character. You could say that he was the OG. Not the original gangster, but the original griever. He fretted over everything and openly carried his sadness. If there were ever a figure who knew grief, it was our own C. Brown and his sidekick, the original Snoop Dogg. But at the age of 8, Charlie had a much better understanding of grief than the rest of us. Author Claire Bidwell Smith in the book Anxiety, The Missing Stage of Grief, says that our culture has no idea how to deal with the pain of loss. And unfortunately, we live in a time of unparalleled grief. We mourn the loss of more than 400,000 people to the pandemic. We mourn a way of life that seems to have disappeared. And there was a time this spring when we all mourned the loss of toilet paper. But we have little idea how to process that grief or even recognize it in others. Grief is quite possibly our next pandemic. Now, just as Charles Schulz drew his Peanuts comic strip in 4 frames, let's take a look at our 4-step analysis. First, with how we medicalize grief. Next, how we want to limit for grief. Third, the implications from all of this. And finally, some solution steps to help us kick some sense into our grief dilemma. Besides his thinning hairline, Charlie Brown was best known for his signature line, "Good grief." He said it all the time. Charles Schulz chose this phrase as a euphemism for the term "good God," which some saw as offensive. The expression "good grief" was like, "Great Scott," or "holy crap." But of course we don't see grief as good. Scott, which is the name of my dad, is not that great. He's just good enough. And if crap were holy, my coach would be the Pope. Not only do we see grief as anything but good, we also medicalize it, which is the first barrier. Nancy Burns in the book Closure describes the medicalization of grief as the need to think of grief as a disease that needs to be cured. And to do so, we must choose a specific treatment. A pill, a procedure, a simple prescription. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 1969 book on death and dying helped to medicalize grief with its famous 5 stages. Like a sickness, grief is treated with this very specific prescribed movement through these emotional states, or even medicated with antidepressants. Now, I don't mean to suggest that medical diagnosis or treatment for grief is universally bad. However, the concern, according to Donna Sherman, director of the Dougy Center for Grieving Children, is that we have applied this medical model too broadly. And in doing so, we have pathologized the grieving process. Even Kubler-Ross herself acknowledged this mistake years later, apologizing for what her work had become. She states that the 5 stages of grief were meant to give comfort to grievers, not create a cage. One of the common scenes in the Peanuts comic strip shows Lucy selling emotional support in her psychiatric help booth. Her most frequent customer, Charlie, comes to her feeling a little low. And her response, "Snap out of it." 5 cents, please. Much like Lucy, we tell those who grieve to snap out of it. Only instead of using those exact words, we say things like, "It's time for closure." We literally expect people to limit their grief. How long? Well, according to a 2013 edition of the DSM, which is a manual that defines mental and emotional conditions, the answer is 6 months. Anything longer than that is considered a disorder, which means the shelf life of Nutella is actually longer than the amount of time we allow people to grieve. The book Option B by Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg, written shortly after the death of her husband, notes that it's built into our cultural expectations, where we expect answers to our problems to be both inspiring and immediate. But it's not that easy, is it? Nora McInerney, creator of Terrible, Thanks for Asking, explains that perhaps the most hurtful comment made to those who grieve is don't you think it's time to move on? This leaves people, especially ones who are in grief, with the false idea that pain and loss are short-term things, and that after grief, you will never have to deal with those feelings of pain and loss again. But as Megan Devine says in her book, it's okay that you're not okay. Some things can't be fixed. They can only be carried. And that's what grief is all about. What we carry. My guess is that we don't realize exactly how much grief we've taken on. In part because we only define grief within the context of death. Consequently, it weighs heavily on our thoughts and our spirits, and because we don't see it, we don't address it. When I was 5, I found a dead butterfly and I carried it to my grandma. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that we spent almost 4 hours planning and holding a memorial for that dead butterfly. She was very tolerant. But today I'm carrying something new. My grandma has dementia. And we are losing this dear, precious, kind-hearted spirit, little by little. And until recently, I had no idea that this was grief. That what I was carrying was something more than just sadness, but something different from depression. It was loss. And while my story might be different from yours, I would guess that many of you here today are also carrying a heavy load of unacknowledged grief. It can come in so many forms: the loss of a job, a relationship, a cherished pet, a way of life. As a country, we are grieving. We grieve Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We grieve the events of January 6th and the Capitol riots. And more than anything, we grieve the loss of civil debate, conversation, and a sense of community. Grief is so much more than just a medical condition, just a passing condition, or a condition that can be limited to the moment of death. It's just a human condition. Sheryl Sandberg explains that when we grieve, it's because we've lost option A. So she tells us, and I quote, "We just have to kick the shit out of option B," which is why I now call my sister option B. So how do we get there? Well, grief is far more complicated than anything I can explain here, but here are a few suggestions. First, listen to the words of Martin Seligman, professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, who says that while grieving, not to fall into the 3 P's trap: personalization, pervasiveness, and permanence, meaning you are at fault. All aspects and people in your life will suffer, and it will always be this way. Second, join the grief literacy and compassionate community movement. Promoted by Dr. Laura Breen and a team of international researchers, this movement is about helping everyone, the parent, the child, even the teacher, learn the language of loss. Because, as the old saying goes, there are only 2 certainties in life: death and taxes. Grief comes after both of those things. It is time that we learn to both navigate and live with our grief. The result will be that you start to develop resilience. And the residue of resilience is hope. And that's all my advice. And for that, it'll be 5 cents, please. And then may I please be excused to my other round?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Judges, the time on that was 10:14. Let me just double check who we've got in here. DeMarco, do you have another event to get into, or is this your last one?
This is my last one that I have to attend.
So we're just going to keep moving down the list, and then we'll circle back to you, okay?
Sounds good.
Next up, we're going to have speaker I-5, Reagan Van Avery.
And then can everyone see and hear me all right? Yeah, awesome. And then can I just get a 1 at 9 and a fist at 10 if I get there, please? Thank you. It's 8th grade. I'm at the back of my bus playing truth or dare. You know, cool kid things. When my friend Blake jumps in the seat across from me, he looks me dead in the eyes, hands me a piece of paper, and very seriously says, "Regan, I drew you this penis diagram. It's time you know what they look like." Like, all of a sudden, I didn't have access to the internet or something. And while tiny Blake explaining to me what testicles were for was legitimately hilarious, it actually speaks to a much larger issue: the constant suppression and denial of women's sexuality. Blake assumed that I, an innocent girl, couldn't possibly have been as curious about sex as he was. That was a boy thing. I mean, okay, the picture was literally, you know what I'm saying. There is a perception in our society that sex, sexual curiosity, desire, drive, and agenda are the realm of men, not well-behaved women. However, according to award-winning freelance journalist Rachel Newer, women don't have lower sex drive than men. What they do have are more variable patterns. However, this conception of women being non-sexual is causing harm in our society. We must stop making excuses and embrace the idea that women can be sexual and have agency over their sexuality. And that's okay. So first, we'll explore how women experience a range from desexualization to hypersexualization. Next, the impact this has on women's control over their own bodies, before finally delving into some possible solutions. Blake's perceptions on my view of sex weren't entirely out of the ordinary. There's pervasive belief in our society that women don't have sex because they choose to have sex. For example, as reproductive freedoms are at risk, women rally behind 2017 tweet of singer Halsey, where she writes, "There are reproductive disorders that can cause organ failure, cancer, immobility on top of excruciating pain. Birth control can help them." And this is true. There are valid reasons for taking birth control that aren't sex-related, but sex-related reasons are valid too. What many women, including Halsey, tend to omit is what the Guttemacher Institute claims to be the #1 reason why women take birth control: so they won't get pregnant. Yeah, that's right. Women take contraceptives so they won't conceive, so they can enjoy sex. However, we constantly feel the need to medically justify women taking birth control because we cannot accept that women, like all other animals, are sexual beings. And maybe it's not our fault. Maybe we can't accept that women like sex because we were never taught they could. Jess Phillips, in her 2018 Guardian article, explained sex education as being taught how to handle this of men's pleasure safely. And this is not exclusive to Phillips' experience in an all-girls school. Currently, not a single state in the United States enforces female pleasure to be taught in sex education courses. Instead, students are taught about safe sex for men, condoms but not dental dams, preventing consequences but not gaining consent, ejaculation but not the female orgasm. By denying that women find sex pleasurable, we inherently deny that they can be anything except pure. The fact that for some of you hearing these words, especially coming from a young woman, makes you so uncomfortable speaks to how deeply ingrained this issue truly is. And it's important to remember that the lack of education on female pleasure stems directly from a desire to control women's bodies. And it even negatively impacts the diagnoses by the doctor wives of our great American commentators. When Ben Shapiro told his wife that Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion sang a song about their wet ass P-words, "It's okay, Benny boy, you can say pussy," she diagnosed them with bacterial vaginosis, a yeast infection, and trichomonas. which then led many Twitter users to question if Dr. Moore Shapiro, should be allowed to practice medicine, or if she had ever experienced arousal before. And while this attempted Twitter burn by Ben Shapiro may have backfired in his face, it actually speaks to a much larger issue. Women are seriously uninformed about their sexual health, which isn't surprising, as the Guttmacher Institute claims that only 17 states in the United States enforce sex education to be medically accurate. And Zoya Jervis, in her 2019 article, explains that only half of women feel informed when making reproductive health decisions. The objectification of women stems directly from the lack of education on their own bodies, leaving them to be passive recipients of the male gaze. The effects, however, are devastating. A Pew Research Center poll found that while 56% of gay men come out before the age of 30, only 36% of gay women do. By disallowing women to be sexual, by never allowing them to explore their sexuality outside of the context of male sexual activity, women are left accepting fundamental parts of their identity significantly later than men. Women are constantly denied sexual agency, while white and Asian women are desexualized, purified, and portrayed as weak and submissive. Latina and Black women are hypersexualized, adultified at a young age, and portrayed as pornographic without their consent. On either end of the spectrum, hypersexualized and desexualized, women are used to fit the particular needs, even fetishes of male-driven society. Nowhere is this more evident than in the award-winning film Cuties. In the original poster, 4 girls are seen walking down the street, celebrating joyously, wearing bras and underwear over their clothing. However, in the Netflix poster for the same film, the same 4 girls are seen on stage, wearing revealing clothing, with the 3 girls of color in sexually suggestive poses, according to Nicole Cordoza in her Anti-Racism Daily article titled, "Let Black Girls Be Girls." And it wasn't just the poster. Netflix even changed the original innocent description of the film to include one of the characters' fascination with twerking. On either end of the spectrum, hypersexualized and desexualized, women are constantly Not even my parents told me that. I grew up thinking my normal desires were disgusting, that they were something to be ashamed of. And it took me a long time to come to terms with my sexuality because I could not accept that sex didn't have to revolve around a man. But women can be sexual. Women have desires. The solutions? My 2-step plan I like to call my WAP, with openness and pleasure education. I just really like the acronym. First, we must be open and visible about why birth control is so imperative, and not just for medical reasons. We must normalize that sex is okay, normal, and desirable, even for women. And this means not silence heterosexual relationships. We must stop using the scary, over-exaggerated statistics, which have proven not to prevent sex, but only to prevent safe, consensual sex. We must push the boundaries of sex education from only focusing on STD and pregnancy prevention to also including safety, consent, and pleasure. And we must encourage our politicians to follow suit of California's Healthy Youth Act, which required that students were taught about infections. Yes.
I'm sorry to stop you. You are cutting in and out.
Okay. Would you like me to leave the meeting and rejoin?
Yeah, I'd like to start just back a little bit, maybe from, where we stopped you, if we can get a better connection.
Yeah, so just in my solutions there. Okay, sounds good. I will leave and rejoin the meeting and try it again, and hopefully the connection is better then.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I can give her a fair
Yeah.
critique.
Do we think it might be beneficial to, after she finishes up her performance, maybe have her record the speech on her own and send it to the judges so that we can watch it without being distracted by technical issues?
Yeah.
For that, rather than just starting at the end,
Okay.
because she cut out quite a bit throughout the thing, didn't she?
Yeah. Yeah.
That might be, in my opinion, that might be a tab question because then we're dealing with one speech that we can see again and stop and pause to understand versus these other students who kind of had one go for us to hear it. So that might be a tab question, from my opinion.
Yeah. How about we have her join us in the help room after this round, and we'll discuss with them what they think the best course of action is.
Did she finish or what?
Would you like me to resume that? Sure.
You see, Reagan, we're having problems because you had a tendency of cutting out throughout the piece. I could understand what you were saying, so I wasn't concerned too much about it, but there were kind of long segments. So I don't know. I'm from far away, so
Yeah.
it's up to you guys.
So for the sake of the live stream, would you like to finish up your suggestions? And then after this round, we're going to have you join us in the help room to figure out the best to go back separately, perform it for us again, just to give you a fair judging perspective.
That's it. That works for me. And we must encourage our politicians to follow suit of California's Healthy Youth Act, which required that students were taught about the intersections of sexual and gender identities in their sex education courses, and promoted that students explore their pleasure in health. Discussions surrounding women and sex are pervasive. It's time that we all, men, women, and genderqueer people, deserve sexual agency. And that is more than okay.
Okay, thank you, Reagan. Again, do not let the technical issues psych you out. We're going to get this figured out so you can have your fairest judging perspective. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, Y7, Holly Reested.
Can everyone hear me and see me all right?
Is this Y7 or Y1?
Holly, what is your speaker code?
Oh, goodness, Y1.
Okay.
And I don't need any time signals. I have an irrational fear of winged animals. Birds, bees, bats, and the worst, wasps. About 2 weeks ago, I met my match. My wicked witch, my Voldemort, my one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. There was a wasp in my room. Google told me to just open a window and wait. You see, but I wasn't waiting for anything. So I typed in the search bar, the quickest way to kill a wasp. And 5 minutes later, I found myself standing in the middle of my room with a bottle of hairspray and safety scissors, ready to attack. Yeah, I'm sad to say my 5-minute fix failed miserably, but I must admit, it's not the first time I've looked for the quickest way to do something, the fastest way to memorize a speech, the quickest way to cure a cold, the fastest way to get coffee out of the carpet. And I know I'm not alone in wanting to solve my problems fast. You've probably tried to make room temperature butter in the microwave. Or maybe tried to lose 10 pounds by Christmas. And it's not our fault. We just have a quick fix mentality, as defined by the National Recovery Network as preferring solutions not based on their effectiveness, but rather solutions that offer the quickest and possibly only temporary remedy. My concern is when we continually opt for these fast-paced solutions that we create a plethora of unintended consequences. So today, to better understand this quick fix mentality, let's look at the causes, implications, and not so quick solutions. Now, much like me and my failed WASP murder attempt, we hate waiting for results, mainly because of our innate instant gratification bias. Now, when we hear the words instant gratification, you probably think about getting an immediate reward. Joy from scrolling through your phone or ordering the fast shipping from Amazon. And this can be beneficial. In fact, a 2019 Harvard Business Review paper cites that our need for instant gratification can lead us to donate or help others. And in contrast, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania explain that when it comes to finding solutions, it's downright dangerous because we aren't looking to get a reward. We're looking to get rid of a problem. For instance, if you put a hole in the wall, you're more likely to hang decorations rather than fix it. Or maybe you're hungry, so you order Uber Eats. And while we may sometimes do these things because they're cheaper or easier, it's more often that they're simply faster. And this is because of our second cause. We literally can't think in the future. In fact, a 2011 study by Hal Hirschfield details that when you think about yourself in the future, you think of a completely different person. And frankly, it's someone you don't care about. And so you support policies that help you in your current situation, or make financial decisions that may help now but hurt later. It's easy to see why doing something like wearing COVID masks for months is so difficult for us. Because although it's easy to do so, it's just not fast enough. And when we go down the path of fast fixes, we leave a trail of new problems behind. And nowhere is this more evident than in personal health. In fact, a 2018 Carnegie Mellon University study estimates that of those who diet, 83% opt to yo-yo diet, meaning that they aim for fast weight loss only to gain it back. What's even scarier than fast fixes in physical health is we think we can do the same in our mental health. If you were to type in your search bar right now, mental health hacks, you would find over 63 million articles. From 50 mental health hacks you can do right this second, to 20 hacks to help you feel better today. Recommending that you get up 15 minutes earlier to cure depression, or go for a walk to be less anxious. And while to some of you, it may seem rather ridiculous that someone could think that these quick fixes could be the solution. For someone struggling with their mental health, hope of a quick fix could be keeping them from seeking true help. And personal health isn't the only realm in which our quick fix mentality plays out. It often occurs when we think we can solve problems that are larger than ourselves. For instance, in 2014, in preparation for the Rio Olympic Games, impoverished and homeless children were detained in a quick attempt to make the streets of Brazil look safe and inviting. Before the 2020 Olympic Games were canceled, there was a similar occurrence in Tokyo. Their fast solution to homelessness and domestic poverty was to sweep the poor people under the rug. Yet our quick fix attempts aren't always so sinister. They often come from the best intentions. From thinking that COVID stimulus checks will actually help to offset the huge losses during COVID-19. Or giving every child a device will somehow make e-learning an equitable learning environment for all. We seem to think that our quick fixes will solve real problems overnight. And while these actions themselves aren't inherently bad, the problem arises when we do nothing more than that first quick fix. Like in 2018, when students across the nation participated in school walkouts to protest gun violence. These protests were incredibly impactful in raising awareness. I can tell you, as a student who attended one of the protests, I've done nothing since to continue my support. Because often in times of tragedy, when we act fast, we forget that a quick fix just isn't enough. So then what's the solution? Well, I can give you 3 steps to get rid of this problem in no time. Okay, I guess it's a little contradictory. You see, oftentimes in oratory, we fall into this quick fix trap. Novice year, I wrote an oratory explaining that we shouldn't hold such high expectations for ourselves. And my first solution was to write down a list of 10 goals on a sheet of paper. If I were to write down a list of all the people who actually went home and did it, it would be blank. And sure, it was technically a solution, but I felt compelled to provide my audience with a quick fix that they could enact. And as audience members, we love to hear that there are fast ways to solve these sizable problems. But it would be unrealistic of me to give you a blanket or fast solution that would work in all quick fix situations. So instead, I'll offer you 2 questions to ask yourself to determine if your solution is more than just, well, hairspray and safety scissors. Orators, feel free to think about your own solutions as well. First, what is the actual problem your solution solves? As Harvard paleoanthropologist Daniel Lieberman argues, we often don't realize when our solutions are solving for symptoms rather than the root cause of the problem. For instance, in Rio, the large unhoused population was largely due to rising land costs. Thus, relocating or detaining people is never going to address the true problem. Second, imagine your solution is implemented, and hear me out. Visualize it fails, but then ask yourself, what now? Leadership strategist Sunny Giles explains that solving problems effectively requires you to pivot to a better solution if the first try fails. Visualizing this before it's implemented might force you to recognize the true nature of your solution. Now, not to name any names, but the next time you think about killing a wasp with hairspray, think again. Or at least ask yourself, what and what now? Because while our innate instant gratification bias and failed future thinking attempts may cause us to make quick decisions, we truly have the decision to make a better choice. Because if my fear of winged animals and our quick fix mentality have anything in common, it's that although they may be irrational, there's hope that they can someday be overcome.
All right. Well, thank you, Holly. Reagan, you're still in the room, is that right? Okay, so in consultation with the tab, we're actually going to follow a protocol set down by NSDA. And so what we're going to have you try is to leave the room and go ahead and record it and then upload it or share it with this account, minspeech@gmail.com. And then after the round, we will pull the 5 judges into the help room and give them an opportunity to view that. So I will be here in this Zoom all along. So Reagan, if you have questions after the final speaker, feel free to circle back this way. If you have a chance to upload it using data versus your Wi-Fi, that might be like a little bit better. But yes, yeah, like I said, give that a shot and then let me know.
Then should I sit in the round through the last speaker then?
Nope, you go ahead
like
and record that. Yeah, record that right now. Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay, thank you, Tab and Help, for helping us out with that. Judges, Holly's time was 9:23. Terry, can you just please quickly mute your microphone so that we don't hear our speakers through your computer? Thank you so much. And then we're going to go on to our final speaker for today, P5 DeMarco Walden.
Hey, my mic's muted.
And can you guys hear and see me okay? All right. And for time signals, could I get a 1 at 9 and a fist at 10? Thank you. It is hard to trust history books. When I first figured out that the Underground Railroad wasn't actually underground, I felt betrayed. Like when I figured out that cats didn't actually have 9 lives, or there wasn't a galaxy far away with cool stuff a long time ago. And when I figured out that the Underground Railroad was not just above ground, but not even a train, it broke my faith in both the English language and those damn history teachers. But what I did discover was a woman named Harriet Moses Tubman, an abolitionist guided by her faith who secretly led over 300 slaves to freedom. She had trust in a network of abolitionists, trust in her God, and most importantly, trust in herself. And in a day and age where we struggle to trust anything at all, her story seems unbelievable. Trust has become a luxury between one another and between people and institutions non-existent. According from data collected since 2000 from the marketing firm Edelman, Americans have reached a record low level of trust. And this is terrifying, as according to the Economic Cooperations of Development, trust is the foundation in which the legitimacy of public institutions is built and is crucial for social cohesion. At the core of every dispute, whether it be personal, social, or political, we lack trust. And that's why I'm here today. Let's first consider how we are oftentimes unwilling to trust. Second, how our institutions have become unworthy of said trust, the harms of our current situation, and finally, how to get back above ground. Miss Tubman was an exceptional woman for so many reasons. Her extraordinary compassion, her bravery, and her ability to trust other abolitionists. I mean, just imagine the first time a white guy said that he would help her. There had to be a voice in the back of her head saying, screw it, I'll just take the Greyhound. Although she was able to put her skepticism aside, this is something we struggle to do in the simplest of exchanges, which is my first area of analysis. Oftentimes we are unwilling to trust. The goal was supposed to be healthy skepticism, a term coined by Peter R. Mansfield, which means that we don't take the facts given to us as gospel, but rather ask deeper questions to gain more knowledge and to make a logical conclusion. Like when Kanye decided to say that slavery was a choice, and we all took a step back, remember what slavery actually was, and came to the logical conclusion that he's definitely having an episode. That's healthy skepticism. However, the problem comes when we take this too far and end up trusting nothing. Consider 2 polls taken in December of 2020. The first being an Oregon State Cascade poll of 500 people, which indicated that 30% of those didn't believe that COVID was real, making enforcing any sort of mandate a near impossible task. The second being an NPR poll, which indicated that 25% of everyone and 75% of Republicans did not trust the election results, resulting in things such as the siege of our Capitol on January 6th. This is no longer healthy skepticism. This is toxic skepticism. We've created our own Underground Railroad. We've dug our way beneath ground, but not towards freedom, but towards anxiety, fear, and paranoia. Miss Tubman knew that to survive, she would have to trust, but she wasn't stupid. According to Katherine Clinton, her biographer, Miss Tubman often carried her faith and a gun to get the job done. She knew that certain people and institutions were untrustworthy. which is my second area of analysis. Sometimes our institutions are unworthy of our trust. James Baldwin once wrote, "I cannot believe what you say because I see what you do." And this rings true for many things. My history teachers, of course, but especially our own government. Let's be honest, our government is extremely inconsistent. And on the long list of ways to lose trust, that is definitely at the top. For example, whenever a love scene comes on Netflix, I guarantee you my mom will appear. Consistency, that's trust. However, when these patterns are broken, that's when we start to lose our faith. So when people and our government consistently fail to deliver on their promises, it easily fractures that trust. Keith Ellison, the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota and the lead prosecutor in the George Floyd case, stated in a recent interview that there is a two-tiered system of justice in America, one for white people and one for people of color. White people have the privilege of being seen as more than their mistakes. In contrast, people of color don't. Our leaders discourage our trust when they fail to deliver on the basic necessities of government, whether it be fair laws, fair enforcement of said laws, or even administrating a vaccine. And it shows, as according to a Pew study conducted in 2020, only 20% of US adults trust our government and officials to do the right thing. We have reached a crucial moment in this country. According to Stephen Levinsky in his 2018 book, How Democracies Die, when our government is unable to gain our trust, it becomes a threat to our very own democracy. On a trip as dangerous as one to the north, those who were guided by Miss Harriet had to submit to her rules. However, their sacrifices were for the greater good of the group. This is a basic idea of the social contract, the idea that we sacrifice some of our freedoms for the sake of other freedoms and protection. In theory, this is how it's supposed to work. In reality, however, the train has taken a slightly different course because a contract doesn't seem to protect everyone in this country. For far too many people of color who have put their trust in government, law enforcement, health workers, and even each other on every level, the contract has failed us. During my 11th grade year winter break, a friend and I were driving around when all of a sudden we'd heard the sirens of a cop car. He pulled us over and said that he needed to conduct a search without a single probable cause. As I sat in the back of the cop car, I couldn't think, because the only thing I could feel was terror. I did not trust that he would treat me with fair expectations. I didn't even trust that he wouldn't kill me. And far too many people will say that in this situation, I should just trust the process, that I have nothing to fear if I'm innocent. But when the police are kneeling on a man's neck as he pleads for his mother, or barging into a home without a warrant, and shooting down a helpless and terrified woman, I have to wonder whether this contract was ever meant for us. And I'm reminded of a Langston Hughes poem, which asks, what good is my trust if I'm dead? Now, I won't sit here and lie to you and say that I have all the answers. I mean, look at me. I'm an 18-year-old with no diploma that had my mom tie this knot before I joined the chat. But I do have my girl, Miss Harriet Moses Tubman, to take some inspiration from. Ms. Tubman believed that with an honest action, we can change the world. And there's evidence to suggest that we believe the same thing. In that very same Pew study conducted in 2020, 84% of those interviewed believe that this can change. So let's build a railroad, but one connecting us with trust and built on a foundation of honesty. According to Kim Ellsback, professor of UC Davis, in her 2020 Forbes article, in communities where trust has been broken, government and officials will first have to acknowledge their mistakes, take responsibility, and demonstrate that they have learned from them. But this is something we can all do to begin healing. Second, according to the Stanford Social Innovations Review, once this foundation of honesty is set, we can then set down our twin rail lines of consistency and commitment. The first consistency is established over time. It's the parent that consistently shows up for their child. It's government agencies that consistently fits the needs of the people. The second commitment means that we need to make trust a verb. It's something you do. And even though you may consistently show up, you commit to doing so even when it gets hard. That's trust. Now, these things won't happen overnight. But when this bond between us is forged, we become a better us. One where we don't doubt each other, where we hate each other just a little less. A place I want to be, and one I hope you want to have.
All right, thank you, DeMarco, and thank you, speakers, for sharing your performances and writing out these technical things with us. And best of luck with awards. All right.